And we're live. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jenny from the channel The Story Ain't Over. You guys know me. And I have the lovely Hannah here from A Clockwork Reader to discuss the Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali for the Reading Color Book Club. I am super excited to talk about this book, and I'm also so sorry to all of you who got the wrong time there for the live show because I was dumb and brain farted and didn't realize that 1 p.m. ET is not 11 a.m. PT. But here we are, and we all made it here in one piece. So I'm going to get everyone, as always, to leave an emoji in the comments for me. Leave a heart if you finish the book, and leave a smiley face if you haven't finished the book, just so I know like who's sort of read it and how many spoilers we can get into off the bat. And I'm going to throw it to Hannah to say hi and also tell us what the Stationery Shop is all about.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah, and yeah, the Stationery Shop. This is one of my favorite books of last year, so I was super excited when Jenny asked me if I wanted to do this live show. But the book is about, it takes place in two different timelines. We jump back and forth from the present and the past. So in the past, it takes place in 1953 in Iran, and it follows the story of our main character, Roya, and this man that she falls in love with named Bahman. And then it takes place during like the coup d'etat in Iran in 1953. So there's like a prime minister who's been elected, and then they like overthrow him, kill him. It's like this whole thing. So it takes place during that time, during like political upheaval. And then we follow their relationship then. And then we also follow Roya after she moves to the United States, and she has an entirely different life here now. And it's like this very much, I like to describe it kind of like Evelyn Hugo, in the sense that it like very much follows like this like entire lifespan of this one character, and we get to see her grow and change, and we get to see her entire life and how this relationship affected her, and it's just wonderful. So that's my brief synopsis of it. I'm very bad at describing books, so I apologize.
No, you did a great job. And actually, I love the comparison to Evelyn Hugo because I was actually just filming a video with like personalized recommendations, and someone asked for something similar to Stationery Shop, and I was like, well, if you like the vibe of this, you probably would like Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, because very similar aching vibes
Yes.
to it.
Yes.
But yes, that was a great description. And I think this book hits a lot of points for our book club, because I feel like a lot of us have sort of enjoyed the books with like a historical part to it, or, you know, a lot of themes to discuss. And I feel like the political and historical parts of it were really, really interesting as well. So to start us off, now that I see that most of you have like literally read this book, I love the broken heart, Priya. Thank you for that. Yeah, mostly hearts over here. Like I barely see a smiley face, so I'm glad. But I do want to see what everyone sort of thinks of the book. What's your general thoughts about the book, and what would you rate it? And yeah, I guess we can start here. If Hannah, you want to go first.
Sure. Well, I gave this 5 stars. I loved it. This was one of the first books that I ever read about like historical fiction, in a sense, about Iran. So that was like really interesting for me. And also just like I've talked about this when I reviewed the book too, but like it was a really nice reading experience, because as I was reading it, I didn't know a lot about like the history of it. So I could like go to my mom and be like, hey, what happened during the coup
Oh, I
d'etat in
love that.
1953? And she would like tell me, and like, obviously like that was years before she was even alive, but they learned about it in
Yeah.
history. And so like she would tell me about it. And so I got to like have conversations like with my family about like the story itself too. So it was a very immersive reading experience, in the sense that like I could involve other people in my reading experience, and I got to learn a lot about like my own like cultural history and stuff. So that was really nice. But yeah, general thoughts. I just thought like it was such a heartbreaking story, but in like the best way. I like really bittersweet endings to books. I'm not like, I like a happy ending, obviously, like I want that from time to time, but I'm very much a fan of a bittersweet ending. And this very much has a bittersweet ending. And it also, I just loved the characters throughout the book. I loved the themes that the book discussed. And I overall just thought it was such an enjoyable read. And I want more things like this, and it's hard to find.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's like so unique, but also like I'm sure there are books like it out there. I just like haven't
Mhm.
found them. But yeah, everything you said, I completely agree with. And I was so excited actually, like sort of starting this book club. I was like, oh, I'm so excited to like bring other hosts on. And immediately I was like, oh, it would be so cool to bring Hannah on to talk about the stationery shop because I know she loves that book. And also it's just got so much depth to it. And I, wanted to see your perspective being Persian. So that was just really exciting to me. But like, yeah, overall for me, like I definitely rated it 5 stars. No surprise. This is one of my favorite books of last year when I read it. And it just like stole my heart, broke my heart, left me sobbing by the end because I'm a huge crier. Yeah, and I just loved, as you said, like the bittersweet ending and sort of the dramatic nature of it, I guess. I just loved it. And I also loved how it was like this sort of long look at this one girl's life. And not only the romance, but also the other losses that she goes through over
Mhm.
her life, which I really appreciated. So it was just so beautiful and like very much a impactful read that like I can't stop thinking about most of the time. So yeah,
Mhm.
I agree. I'm gonna see what other people have said. So some 4 and 5s, 4.5. Not usually a fan of historical fiction, but the family aspects really hit home for me, which made it a 5 stars. Yes, agreed. And we'll get into all the characters and plot lines and stuff. I think I rated it a 5. It was a great, such beautiful writing and made me feel like I was actually there. Yeah. Oh my God. We'll talk about the writing because
Mhm.
love it. Um, okay. I'll keep thinking about this one for a long time. Yeah, more fans of bittersweet endings. Love it. Love that it wasn't wrapped up in a neat bow. This is my favorite. Also cried for about 2 hours after finishing it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the first time I like sobbed throughout like this whole second half.
Mhm.
Just like continuously. Because I remember I read that quite quickly the first time as well. Like I was reading it through the audiobook and I was like, I just need to know
Mhm.
now what's going to happen. And even though you sort of know how it ends from the beginning, it still doesn't like change the fact that you want to know what's happening and you
You
want
just
them
have
to
to
be
know how we
together.
get there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it really keeps you
exactly.
reading. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly. And it's funny because like usually, and I feel like this is one of those books where it's like must be really satisfying for the people who love like reading the last page of a book before they
Oh
like
yeah,
read a book kind of thing. Because like you
for sure.
already have where it's all lined out and you just have to figure out what happens in between. So I love that. Um, let's see. It was so good. I love the story. Writing was beautiful. I went to find other books she had written as soon as I was done. Yeah, I actually do want to read her other book. I think it's called Together Tea,
Mhm.
which I do want to pick up at some point. Okay, amazing. So now that we've sort of talked about our general thoughts, if you haven't read Stationery Shop, please leave now so that you do not get spoiled. I hate spoilers for books, so I don't want you to get spoiled. And we're going to get into specific aspects of the book and what we thought of it now. So what do you want to discuss first, Hannah? I guess I'll throw it to you. There's so many things.
Um,
So,
I guess. I mean, who are some of your favorite characters in the book?
ooh, yeah, that's always one of my favorite things to talk about. I have so many. I think I love Roya for just like her resilience throughout the entire book.
Mhm.
I also really love Zari for just being freaking hilarious throughout the entire book, but also I hated her in like that annoying sister way. If you have sisters, you're like, you are so
Yeah.
annoying. So I did sometimes find her annoying. And then I also love Bahman. I think there's something about the way that he is continuously in love with Roya despite everything through the many decades that was just so endearing about him. And even at the end, his like last
Mhm.
letter just
Mhm.
broke me. And
Mhm.
then the last one is probably Claire. I think she was such an interesting like character that was like thrown in there. And you don't think much of her, but she has a lot of depth to her, and just the way that her story sort of fits into their story across
Mhm.
like after many decades was just really cool to me at least.
Mhm.
What does everyone
Yeah.
think? What do you think?
I also really loved Roya, and I thought she was such a good main character. Some of my favorite parts of this book were the like parts where they were young and they were falling in love,
Mhm.
because those are usually my favorite part of like romance books because there's like less pain.
Yeah.
But I just really loved them when they were young. Like I just loved that
Mhm.
aspect of it. It was like definitely one of my favorite parts of the entire book. But I also just I really loved Batman. Like I loved him. Like I thought he was
Yeah.
such a good love interest, and I thought he was such a good character.
Mhm.
And then my other favorite character was honestly, oh my gosh, what's his name? I'm very bad with names, so I'm sorry if I forget everyone's names.
Is it his
Mr.
friend,
Fakhri,
Jahangir? Oh no, Mr.
no,
Fakhri, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I loved him, and his whole
Yes.
story destroyed me. It destroyed me. It was
Yeah.
so good and so sad.
Yeah. I feel
Yeah.
that. Mr. Fakhri is such a layered character too, and I do want to talk about him in specific, which I guess we could talk about him now because we're already in spoilers. Because one thing but I like both loved and hated him. Like I do love him and I love his story and whatever.
Mhm.
But I think it's like the knowledge that he did all these wrongs in the past. I'm like, oh, okay, I can't love you completely. But it's just seeing the regret he has and the way that he wanted to make up for it to Bahman's mother was just
Yeah.
so heartbreaking. And I think it's
Yeah.
like even the fact that he dies at the end and like the whole last like chapter is just from his perspective as he's like regretting everything and running over to Roya. And that whole part just like broke me. And I was rereading it. Like I finished my reread last night and like the last paragraph is him watching the stationery shop burn or like realizing that there might be something wrong with it. And he's like, no, 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 it's going to be fine. It's going to live on. Someone's going to take care of it. And all of this sort of penance that I've done for all of my wrongs is still going to be there. And people are still going to be inspired and find the words and the books and everything. And then what's that last one? It's like, it's a love from which we can never recover. Died. I deceased.
Now that I have a
And
physical
goes to
copy,
bed
I need
back.
to go through and like mark all of the quotes because I also listened
Yeah.
to the audiobook when I first read it.
It is a love from which we never recover. That was the
Oh,
best line. Oh my god. Yeah, broke me. Yeah, I think he's just like such a complex character and sort of initially he's like kind of an ass, like in that, um chapter in the past when we get his whole story with Bahman's mother. And you're
yeah.
like, I don't like this guy. And then you find out that it's Mr. Fakhri and you're like, what? Mr.
That
Fakhri,
plot
who
twist
I
was
love?
so much, but I
Yeah.
loved it.
Yeah.
I loved
Oh
it.
my god. I agree. I want to see what other people are saying. With Bahman and Mr. Fakhri, I loved Aurora and her resilience, but wanted her to have more of a backbone at some points. Okay. Especially against Zari. Oh yes. Zari does have a tendency to like make all of these snag remarks. Um,
Hmm.
for sure. I liked Roya and Walter. Oh yeah, Walter is a sweetie, not gonna lie. Um, not
When
necessarily
Walter
together.
came in at first, I was like, I'm suspicious of you. I don't want you here. I'm like, please
Yeah.
go away. And then he turned out to be really nice, and I was like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah, like sweet muffin white boy. I love it.
Yeah.
Loved how caring, considerate, and supportive Walter was. It was nice to see Roya end up with someone supportive, which she couldn't be with Bahman. Yeah, I agree. It was like definitely the next best choice. And he was also so supportive of the fact that she wanted to get closure with Bahman
Yeah.
after so many decades. I think that that was
Yeah.
just like showed how great of a character he was. Bahman and Roya definitely have a special place in my heart. The shopkeeper was also my favorite. His story was so
It
heartbreaking.
was.
Yeah. Can we talk about those final lines? Oh my god, I died. Yeah, join the club. Um,
Mhm.
just it was like a work of art, and that's one of the things I love about this book is that it's not only like this heartbreaking love story and like historical fiction, but it's also like a literary masterpiece. I personally
It's
felt like,
really well written.
yeah, so
Really well
well
written.
written. And like even just like that last paragraph, honestly, in that last chapter, it like turns into this like stream of consciousness piece of writing because he's dying. And it was
Hmm.
just so interesting to see sort of his life flash before his eyes and the things that were important to him in the end, which just loved. Zari bothered me simply because I couldn't figure out why she was so against Batman. Okay, I can see that. I think she was trying to protect Roya though, so that was part of
Hmm.
the reason why. Final line killed me. Favorite side character was Roya's father, so encouraging of his daughters, which would have been rather radical in the time. Yeah, there was like a lot of emphasis on her family being sort of progressive for the time. And
Yeah.
I did like her father. He was like trying to be really supportive, which I appreciated. Yeah. Um, I feel like I need to make an argument for Bahman's mother. Let's do it. Mr. Fakhri was the start of her emotional problems. I don't like the things she did, but she just needed therapy. Yeah, she is definitely a complex character, which we can get into right now. What are your thoughts on Bahman's mother,
I mean,
Hannah?
honestly, I really liked the whole, like, for me personally, as someone who has grown up around other Persian people and like Iranian people in general, but as someone who's also never like been to Iran, it's very different for me than it is for like my parents or something like that. So I have a different
Mm-hmm.
perspective on it, but still culturally, I have some of that like influence and stuff. A lot of the like cultural stuff around like who can marry who and like who like social status being so important is very deeply ingrained into a lot of like Iranian culture. So that was like reading that was like it wasn't unrealistic. Even though this wasn't set like now, it wasn't unrealistic. Like it's very much a cultural thing there.
Mm-hmm.
And so like as I was explaining this book to my mom too, because I said I talked to her a lot about it as I was reading it, and she was like, no, like that's really what it was like, especially then. Like it was way more intense. So
Mm-hmm.
like I also understood her, his mom. Like it made sense. I did not agree with her, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, like I could understand her perspective. I could understand like the like things that she had experienced and how they had shaped her, and also the cultural aspect of it and how important like your status in society is, and like
Mm-hmm.
how much that will affect who you can be with.
Yeah,
And so that was
absolutely.
like, heartbreaking, but also very good. I think
Yeah,
really well done.
absolutely. I agree. Um, like you were saying, sort of, having the perspective and from your back and everything. I feel like it's very similar from like my own background and like South Asian backgrounds and stuff.
Mhm.
It's definitely something I've seen many of the time before with
Yes.
people I know it personally,
Yes.
people who are older than me, old stories that my parents have told me, and sort of the stories from back home kind of thing. So yeah, it was definitely something I was like, I literally nodded my head and I was like, yep, okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
Like was
Like,
not
this is what
surprising
they're
at
like.
all. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And also I
Yeah.
feel like Bahman's mother was a very recognizable character to me as someone suffering from a mental illness but not being able to sort of control her actions around other people and sort of other people suffering from those actions.
Mm.
I've seen that in action before in other parts of my life, and so I had sympathy for her as a character and like someone suffering, but I also had sympathy for the characters who were suffering around her because of her.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like I hated her in many moments for all
Yeah.
of the things that she did so much. Especially the first time reading it. Like this time I had more, patience and
Yeah.
sympathy for her. But the first time I was like, I really don't like you. But yeah, I think she was such a realistic and well rounded character. And it's like, I know and part of this book, it's like it starts out as if it's like just a miscommunication type sort of
Mhm.
misunderstanding, but once you find out the real reason, you're like, ah, damn, I can't even like get annoyed at this completely because it makes so
Yeah.
much sense. Yeah,
I think
it
along
was
with
very
that too, like the amount that their like families were involved in their
hmm
relationship is also super realistic.
yeah, yeah,
Like culturally, especially, like that's just such a thing. Like your families get so involved in anything that you do, but especially when it comes to relationships and stuff like that. So I found that part to be really realistic too. So like as I was reading it, I was very frustrated with her, but I was like, but this is what they're going to do because like culturally, like that's expected, to be this
yeah,
involved in your child's like marriage.
yeah,
Or potential marriage,
exactly.
whatever. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was very well done, I thought.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely something I'm very used to, the whole being very involved in your children's relationships and marriages and things. I have two older sisters for those of you who don't know. But yeah, I totally agree with that. And also just like I love sort of the undercurrent in the book of like highlighting how the sort of patriarchy was very much alive. Like even though Bahman's mother was very against Roy at the beginning, like his father got the final say, and that's just sort of how it rolled until she sort of used her other means of getting her way, which
Yeah.
was quite interesting. Let's see what other people have to say. Thought she was a well-written character, just needed help that they couldn't get at the time. Yeah, oh my God. The part that broke my heart, like the most maybe, is when Bahman mentioned, or Claire mentions that Bahman had often pulled out medical books and like books about therapy and stuff, and had always been thinking about how if his mother had lived in the current like decade or time, she could have gotten the help that she needed, which
Yeah.
oh, broke my heart so many
Mhm.
times. Even reading it back then, yeah, and even this time, I was like, oh my god, I can't just. Oh. And it also speaks to partly. I don't know if this is like similar for you in like Persian culture, but I know in South Asian cultures, it's very much a stigma. Like mental health is very much a stigma, and
Oh yeah.
getting help is very much a stigma. I mean, it's also a
Oh yeah.
stigma in other cultures too. But it's just like an assumption that all of it's going to be fine. One thing I found interesting, even back in the chapters in 1953, was that Bahman and his father were very aware that she was like mentally ill and needed like help, but they just couldn't
Mhm.
do anything, obviously, at the time. Yeah,
Yeah, it very much is. It's very much stigmatized,
yeah,
and especially obviously it's going to be worse in 1953 than it is in 2022. But
yeah,
like still culturally, like it's very much like it's something you don't talk about. Like
yeah.
this is still like a thing with like that I even experience with like family and like relatives, extended
Hmm.
family and stuff like that. It's just like you just don't talk about it. And like
Hmm.
if anyone is struggling, you're not supposed to talk about it. Seeking help is very stigmatized. Like you should
Hmm.
just deal with it on your own. It's something you'll get over. Like it's something you'll recover
Yeah.
from. Like it's very deeply ingrained culturally now. I think also because like I don't know, like a very important part of like Persian culture is like there's like this pride that I
Mm.
think like if you are like not doing well, you're just supposed to like not say anything about it, no matter what
Hmm.
that is,
Like
because
fake
you're
it.
supposed to
Yeah.
be strong. And so yeah, it was very accurate, I thought, but also
Yeah.
really heartbreaking.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. Um, oh, yay. Ramadan
Oh yeah,
Mubarak. I have a love-hate feeling for her because I understand where she was coming from, especially with her past, but I hated the way she went about it. Yeah,
yeah,
totally understand that. Um, I'm from Saudi, still that way here. Yeah, I feel that. Bahman's mother was so young when she had her fling with Mr. Fakhri. Definitely affected
hmm
her whole life and kind of explained why she was the way she was with her son. Yeah, let's talk about that because that is one of the most uncomfortable things about this book for me. I personally feel like, um, because yeah, we get at some point like she actually explicitly says their ages, and Bahman's mother was I think 14 or 15 at the time, and Mr. Fakhri was actually in his early 20s.
hmm
So there's a lot to say there about sort of the actual consent involved there, and also like what he was doing in that situation. And obviously, this is like a different time, so the same sort of checks are not in place. But yeah, I think she was definitely in a very sort of vulnerable position. And although she partly initiated sort of what went on with them, I think she wasn't in the position to be making sort of those decisions about her life. And she didn't really know the ramifications it would have. Um,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, how can you at 14?
exactly. Like, oh my God. Yeah, I know. Just the thought of her being 14. And I was like thinking about like one of my younger cousins who's like, close to that age. And I was like, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I have
it's
a
so
cousin who's
hard.
13 and I'm like,
Mm-mm,
no.
no. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it like speaks to her class too. She was in more of a vulnerable position there as well.
Yeah.
Um, and like it was a time when, abortion wasn't legal as well. As I think they talked about that in
Yeah.
Iran. So that was like, oh my God, so heavy to read about. But like, I'm glad it was like part of the story. Like, I'm glad that she didn't like flinch away from any of the harder aspects of the story
Yeah.
because it made for much more complex characters, I think.
I
If that
agree.
makes
And
sense.
I mean,
Yeah.
like you said, like the same like checks that were in place,
Hmm.
that are in place now did not exist in whatever year that was, because that was way before
Yeah.
1953 too. So
Yeah. I think it's like 1920s or something. Yeah.
exactly. And so like the standards were not the same. The expectations for
Yeah.
people were not the same. And
Yeah.
I know that was very much like a thing. Like I even know of like family members I had who got like distant family members that aren't even alive now because they were alive in the 1920s who got married at like 13, 14, to
Hmm.
people who were much older than them.
Yeah.
And it was very much like a thing. So like
Yeah.
I like that she like included that because I think it gives you a better understanding of her character too. Like you
Yeah.
can sympathize with her despite the fact that you hate every decision she's making as an adult.
Yeah.
um, you can understand her on a different level because it was a
Hmm.
different, like it was a different life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it like makes me wonder about sort of the way that we as people from, the future or like our current day with our very different lives sort of look back and judge things from the past.
Yeah.
But it's like this was their life. This was
Mhm.
how it went down back then. And it's okay to sort of criticize that, but it's also like you have to understand, this was the way things worked back
Yeah,
then. And a lot of people just are part of the machine and not really able to make it stop. Um,
exactly. Like
yeah.
we can look and like analyze and criticize, like you said, like
Hmm.
those relationships or things from like that time, but we can't like judge it by the same standards because
Yes,
it's not
exactly.
the same. Like it wasn't the
Yes.
same.
Yeah.
Even if it was wrong, it wasn't the same. Like it's
Yeah.
not going to be the same.
Yeah. I agree. Amazing. Love the perspective, but I struggled a little because once she was in Roy's situation for not being high enough status, she then shamed her for the same thing. Yeah, that was an interesting sort of part of her character because you expect that because she has come from a lower class, she would have the same sort of sympathy for Bahman, like, wanting to marry Roya, but
See,
it ends up being
I loved
exactly the
that.
opposite.
I
Yes,
love that because I found it so
exactly.
realistic because it was to
Hmm.
me, it was like obviously her own shame that she was projecting. Like the shame she
Yeah,
never recovered from, she was projecting onto Roya. She was like,
yeah,
well, you come from this background, you're never going to be good enough for my son. But that's because she's always still felt this way about herself. And like,
yeah,
I found it so well. Like, that's why I liked her character so much. She was so complex and had so much
yeah.
depth. And I found it so realistic.
Yeah, I agree completely. I'm so glad that she made that decision to sort of have Bahman's mother also disagree because it like
Mhm.
speaks to her own internalized sort of hate for where she has come from, but
Yeah.
also sort of this idea that we perpetuate like our own systems
Yes.
and our own like divisions, if you want to say.
Mhm.
Because yeah, she's coming from a lower class, and there's this idea, this rosy idea that you can break all barriers, whatever, but it's like it's part of this larger system and there's so many other people involved. And so
Mhm.
she was just feeding into this same sort
Well, the
of
thing is, like, she
situation.
never, like, learned. Like, she didn't
Yes.
learn that that was wrong, like, that, like,
Hmm.
it's okay no matter what class you're from, that, like, it's not something to be ashamed of. She never learned
Hmm.
from that. She just, like, suppressed her own feelings about it and her own shame about it, and, like you said, continued to perpetuate that same idea. So she's obviously gonna continue doing that with Roya too.
Hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know, like, I just thought it was so well written, and her
Yeah.
characterization was just so well done.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. And like even the way like she's rejected by Mr. Fakhri for her class, but then she sort of her reaction to that is like not that like the lesson that she learns from that is not that class can be overcome or whatever. She's like,
yeah.
okay, I'm just gonna like find a way to fall, get this engineer guy to fall for me, and I'm gonna rise above my station so that I can be this level, like I can be higher up, and then just be better than everyone kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is like a very reasonable sort of reaction, I think, after
Yeah.
everything that she went through. So yeah, it was we could talk like for ages about her character because she's
Yeah.
so complex and I love it. Um I think my modern American upbringing made it difficult for me to sympathize with Mrs. Aslan, which is why I appreciated the book. It changed my perspective. Yay, love that. This is part of why I, wanted this book club to happen, changing people's perspectives, which I love. Let's see. She was selfish as a result of mental and emotional problems. Her psychological problems ran her life, so she doesn't have the emotional strength to care about anyone else. Yeah, it's definitely sort of a part of her mental illness, and there's so much we could talk about there about just like sort of what mental illness can do to a person, but also like to their relationships and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Oh, and here's another good one. There's like a perception that it's just something in your head and that it'll go away soon, but it's not that simple. And sometimes it's like a lifeline thing, which is very, very true. Um, Sorry, I'm just like trying to read the comments before I like put them up on the screen. Maybe an unpopular opinion, but Mr. Fakhri was the antithesis for many of the characters. He got almost everything he wanted, but ruined lives around him to make himself feel better about his choices. Interesting. I can kind of see that.
Yeah.
Um, he sort of works throughout the book to sort of justify his own actions,
Mhm.
um, even to the end, I think, which I found interesting. What do you think, Hannah?
I agree. Like, I do agree with this perspective a bit. I think that he very much also just feels so much guilt
Yeah.
around everything that he has done and all of the mistakes that he made. And similarly to Batman's mother, like he has suppressed a lot of his own shame and realizes it way too late in life to actually make any kind of substantial changes or make anything right. So, yeah, sometimes he is just doing things to justify his own choices and make himself feel better about his own choices.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I just realized that we're at like half an hour, so I want to move on to some other aspects of the book because we've literally been talking about Mr. Fakhri and Bahman's mother for like half an hour right now. So I would love to hear sort of what did we think of the twist? Because I know Hannah, you mentioned that the whole twist with Mr. Fakhri was like a huge one and you loved it. I agree. Another one of the twists that I didn't see coming was sort of the like wrench in the plan at the end where Roya starts to think that he's like going through dementia or whatever, and I was like, no. And like at that point in the story, I was so scared that we were gonna have a situation where she would just like leave and they would never get things resolved. But thankfully he writes that letter, which I really appreciated. So that was definitely one. Another one I didn't expect was Jahangir's sort of part in the entire story. So the Jahangir was the friend of Bahman's who was secretly in love with him the entire time. And he
Yes.
was also the one who was responsible for ferrying their letters back and forth when they were separated. But part of sort of his part of the story was that he wasn't completely honest with Roya about everything that was going on with Bahman and his mother. And it makes you wonder, did he do that on purpose because he was in love with Bahman, or like what was going on there?
That's
Um,
definitely a twist I did not see coming either.
yeah.
Like
And
I
it's also
kind
sort
of
of like casually
predicted
thrown in there.
I
Yeah.
predicted earlier on, I was like, he's kind of, I think he's in love with him. I was like, I think that
Mm-hmm.
he's in love with him. Like he's got to be. I didn't predict that he was
Mm-hmm.
like messing with like anything, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, I think when I think I did sort of have a suspicion that he might have been the one who like switched the letters or like changed the
Mhm.
letters or whatever when that situation ended up happening. I also thought the whole twist with like the squares and like just switching the names of the squares was really interesting because as I was rereading this time, they hint at the square that Bahman waits in. So there's like this like random side character that they keep mentioning throughout the book where it's like this woman in red who's waiting in
Mhm.
that square for her lover who said he would come meet her in that square, but he never
Yeah.
came. And so for the past like decades, she's been waiting in that square wearing red for her lover. And so it's mentioned like a couple times, like once at the beginning, and then I think once when they're walking through that square. And then later, when in Bahman's letters after like the whole situation blows up and everything, and then you realize that that was the square that, you know, he meant from the beginning because that's one that they had walked through before, but she had been waiting in Safa Square, I think, which I thought was so
Uh-huh.
cool. Just the foreshadowing was so
I have to
interesting.
reread it. I have to reread it and pick up on all of these.
Yeah, it's something I never noticed in the first time I read it because it was just like
Mhm.
this innocuous like detail of this random person, but you really
Yeah.
notice it when you're rereading it because you know what happened with the square and everything, which
Mhm.
I thought was really interesting. Um, Let's see. Did anyone predict it being the mother who changed the letters? For a second, I thought it was solely Mr. Fokker's doing, but then getting Mrs. Aslan's stories, I was like, oh, it makes so much sense. Yeah, this is a good one. What do you think, Hannah? Did you predict it that way?
I definitely did. Like I thought it was
Okay.
her the whole time because I was like,
Hmm.
she's like way too involved. Like
Hmm.
there's a word in Farsi for like nosy, which is like fuzul. Like fuzuli is
Yeah.
like when you get like really nosy and like involved in like people's business. And she was very
Yeah.
much like that. And I was like, she's way too nosy to like not be the one doing this.
Yes,
So yeah, I very much
absolutely.
suspected her.
Yeah, I don't know who I thought. I think I was like someone sabotaging this for sure, but I couldn't pinpoint how it had been sabotaged. Like I didn't put
Mhm.
together that it might have been that they were just waiting at the wrong places.
Yeah.
Especially because like they get the letters afterwards where, you know, this person doesn't love you, whatever. So I was like, oh, okay, she's behind this, and I thought she was just like plainly poisoning, you know, Bahman's mind and sort of
Yeah.
turning him against Roya. But it was interesting that she, because at that point we didn't know the whole history with Mr. Fakhri. So it was interesting how she got him to change the letters.
Yeah.
Um, grandma. Oh, interesting. sorry, I feel like this is a reference to Mrs. Aslan from when we were talking about her before, but I can definitely see that. Have you seen Encanto?
I have not seen
Hannah?
Enchanted.
Okay, so I don't want to spoil anything, but there's definitely similarities between her. Definitely not in a dramatic way, but sort of in a subtle way with the grandma in Encanto. Let's see. It was so frustrating. I think this is in reference to Bahman or Roy. I think that Bahman had dementia or something. Yeah, I was so scared that was going to be like a major miscommunication trope at the end, and I was like, no, don't do this to me. So I'm glad. Yeah, the mother and Mr. Fakhri's relationship, obviously, like the main plot twist. Was not expecting the secret love from Jahangir at all. I remember Jahangir lying to. I feel like he was jealous of Roya. Yeah, I can see that. Wait, stop. That's so crazy because I knew it meant something, but I never thought much of the woman in red. I definitely want to reread because there's so much foreshadowing and parallels throughout. Yeah, guys, reread this again like a few months from now, and you will notice so much foreshadowing because she like literally like lays it out in like bold writing that nothing is gonna go well, and
I
everything's down the
absolutely
drain.
have to reread it.
Yeah, it
Because
was
like
hilarious.
the first time I read it, I was just trying to get through it as fast as possible because I was like, I need to know what happens.
Yeah.
Like I need to know if they're going to be okay, if they ever find out the truth. Like I just need like them to be reunited, and I need her to like know what happened to Bahman. Like I just need her to know. So like I was not paying attention to these details, and I was not picking up on all of this foreshadowing. I was just like, I just need answers. So I have to reread it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, and there's so much. I feel like it's definitely one of those books that like gives you more every time you reread it. Because usually I don't love rereads personally. Because I get bored really easily because I'm more of like a plot reading person. But this one, despite knowing every single plot point and actually distinctly remembering most of like what the twists were and everything, I still was like enchanted the entire time, which was a new experience for me. So I loved it. I had a brief moment I thought it could be Zari, but realized it had to be Mrs. Aslan. I can see that. I was suspicious of Zari in the sense that like she was often, against Bahman, but also would very quite flippantly be like, you can do better or find someone else or whatever else. So I thought like maybe, but I feel like she's just not the jealous type character to go through that much effort, if that makes sense. Okay, this is something I wanted to talk about. Because while I was rereading, I was like, we need to talk about this. All the food in this book made me so hungry. I want to eat all the food they made in this book. Yes, I feel like food was such a huge theme in this book, and I feel like it sort of ties to the Persian culture also, but just sort of the way that it tied into the relationships of the characters as well, and how oftentimes like food was the way that Roya would connect people. Like that's how she and Walter sort of start their romance. I loved it so much. What did you think of all of the food?
I also loved it. I very much loved the scenes of Roya cooking for Walter, and like teaching him about Persian food. I loved those aspects of the story. I loved all of the mentions of the food. It was like, I mean, I grew up eating Persian food all the time. So like anytime I hear people talking about Persian food, I'm like, yes, now I really want Persian food. For me, like some of it was like, it's like some food that I miss because like I'm a vegetarian, so like I don't eat meat, and a lot of Persian foods have like lots of meat in them, so I can't eat a lot of them, or like remake them like vegetarian or like vegan in some way or something like that. So like there were some things where I was like, oh, if I ate meat, I would eat that right now. Because like I miss it, and I was like, now I really want to go to Iran and like eat actual, real, traditional Persian food, or like call my grandma and have her make me something.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. It was beautiful. And like just like the way she describes it was like so vivid and like so specific as well.
Well, food is like a very important like part of like the culture. Like it's anytime you gather with anyone, there is always food. Food very much like brings people together, and which is why I really liked the way that brought her and Walter together. Like she was like, it was like cultural exchange was like a huge part of this, I think, especially in their relationship, which I thought was just so well done. And like every description of food, like it made the book feel like very authentic to me. Like I was like, this just like feels so Persian.
Like she knows the food.
Yeah, like it just like feels what it feels. It feels the way that it feels to be around Persian people. Like for me
Mhm.
personally, at least, like that's how
Yeah.
that made me feel. I was like, I feel like I'm around family.
Yes.
I liked that.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love sort of hearing the descriptions and sort of hearing how some of the foods are like slightly similar to like South
Mm,
Asian foods that I know. And also just like as you said, like the whole cultural exchange and like not only does she share it with Walter, but she also shares the food with Claire at the end of the book,
yeah,
which I think was like a really nice sort of rounding out of the story because she's sort of completing this sort of circle, and also like Claire was able to give her something about like memories of Bahman that she wasn't there
yeah,
for, and so she, wants to give her a good meal. And I love the idea of like hospitality and the importance of that. And it also ties
yeah.
into later, there's a huge discussion of like the Persian tarif. Am I saying that right?
Yeah,
Tarif.
taro.
Tarif.
Yeah,
Yeah, I loved that. And I loved sort of the
that
discussions about how it was like different like
yes.
cultures. Yeah.
Every time a book that I read that is like written by a Persian author is like about Persian
Yeah.
characters or something, and they mention Tarof and like that whole culture, like it it makes me laugh because like my family and I always like joke about like Tarof culture, like it's that
Yeah.
hospitality culture, which is what they call it. There's no like proper English translation for what that word means
Hmm.
because it is being like hospitable and polite, but it's
Yeah.
also just like it's just like a thing like in the culture, like if
Yeah.
someone comes to your house, like you immediately like treat them like they are like a royal guest at your home,
Yeah.
like you offer them like something to drink, something to eat. If they reject it, it doesn't matter. You basically like force feed
Give her a hug.
someone.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you like it's to a fault sometimes, like it's very irritating. Like I've had family like sitting in a restaurant, and like I know plenty of people like argue over like a check, like when you go to like the restaurant and they're like
Yeah.
arguing over who's going to pay. But like I'm serious, like sometimes it's like they're like getting into like an actual battle, like it's embarrassing in front of like the
I love
waiter,
that.
like they're
Yeah.
fighting, like truly fighting over who's going to pay for this, because like it's just disrespectful if you don't argue
Hmm.
about it.
Yeah.
Like it's just like this
Yeah.
whole thing. And so I loved that in the book. I was like, this is literally just what it's like. Like this is
Yeah.
just what they are still like to this day. It's very different for like me and like other like Iranian people I knew who grew up here, who are like Iranian
Mhm.
American,
Yeah.
because like we don't have as much of that anymore, I
Mhm.
think. But like for my parents and like their generation and my grandparents and stuff like that, like it's very much a thing. Like you're
Yeah.
supposed to act this way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I loved that aspect of the book.
Yeah. I loved it. It was so interesting, and I loved like part of that is very familiar to me too. Like in South Asian cultures, it's very common to
Yeah.
be very hospitable and sort of make sure that you give them something to eat or drink or whatever. There's this whole saying like. If someone doesn't even drink a drop of water from your home, like that's kind of disrespectful, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so I just found that interesting. Like it's definitely not as, or at least from like where I'm from, it's not as like formalized as like the Taurus is, but I just thought it was so interesting, and I loved like Roya sort of comparing the differences between the Iranian culture and then what she was used to in America, and sort of like the easy
Mhm.
peasy attitude of Americans, which I thought was so funny,
Yeah.
and just so interesting as well. Like what's sort of seen as disrespectful in some cultures is like totally not in others, which yeah, I just
Yeah.
think
Like
is very
here, if
very
you go
cool.
to someone's house and you ask them, or they ask you if you want a glass of water, you can say, like, no, thanks, I'm good. Like, if
Yeah,
you're not thirsty. But like, if you go to an Iranian person's house and like, you can't say no, like, you have to say, like, yeah, like, well, first you actually have to say no. And then they have to be like,
yeah,
no, you have to
you have to
take it. And then you have to
respectfully
like
decline.
argue
Yeah.
back and forth. But like, even if you like want the water, you have to say no. Like, it's respectful to act that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very interesting.
So great. I love it. This description of Persian culture was personally my favorite thing. The food was so good. I have so much appreciation. Yeah. Honestly, part of me was like, I want to write down these recipes and just like make them
I'll give
now
you
or attempt
recipes.
to. Yeah, please do,
I
honestly.
got you.
The saffron on rice. Oh, I loved the line. There's this line where Roya's like, "Oh, isn't like the saffron in the water? It looks like gold or something." Or there's something about like involving gold, and then Walter's like confused, and she's like, "It's because saffron's expensive," and then he's like, "Oh, okay." I just thought it
Yeah.
was cool.
No, they always talk about how saffron's more expensive than gold and stuff
Hmm.
like that. Yeah.
I love it. Yes. Yeah. One thing I also thought was interesting was like Roya also describes how it was different cooking like much later in like 2013 or whatever when the present time is versus back in 1953 because the technology was so different. So she didn't have to sit around with like the pots for ages to get like the crispy bottom anymore. She just had
Oh,
like a
the
rice
Taddy,
cooker that
yeah.
could do it. I
Yeah.
love that. It was so great. Oh,
Yeah.
so amazing.
That is the thing about Persian food though, like even with modern technology, like it takes a really long time to
Mm,
make.
hmm
Like as someone who like got into cooking in the past like couple of years, I still have a hard time like making Persian foods because making anything takes like triple the time it takes to make like any other food. Like it takes way too long to do this. Like they will be cooking literally all day in order to make it
Oh
like
my God.
properly and to make it taste the way it's
Yeah.
supposed to. Like the food takes like minimum like 3 hours to make
Oh,
at
I
least for
love
like
that.
one thing. So
And I feel
like
like
yeah,
that sort of speaks to like the connection and sort of the
yeah.
sharing and the
It's like
camaraderie of it. Yeah,
yeah, it's
I
supposed to
love
take
it.
a long time because it's supposed to be
hmm
something that like you share with other people and something that like you put so much effort into. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're at 45 minutes. I do want to go a little bit longer just to make sure we covered everything. So if you guys have any questions or topics that you want to discuss before we end this off, leave it in the comments. Hannah, what is there any other topics or themes that you wanted to discuss? I wrote down so many, like I have a whole page of things, but I'm like, we're not going to sit here for the next 2 hours. So here we are.
I'm trying to think if there was anything else. What was because I don't remember anyone's name. What was the
Oh,
name of Walter's sister?
Patricia. Oh my God.
Patricia.
Let's
Okay,
talk
I
about
have thoughts
Patricia.
on
Yeah.
Patricia. So when
Yeah.
Patricia first came in, I hated her. I was like, this
Yes.
girl needs to get out. You need to stop talking to Roya this way. You need to get out. I
Yeah.
cannot stand you.
Yeah.
And then after the like miscarriage, like
Yeah.
after that happened, I and like their whole conversation, I was like, okay, like you really turned this around and now I have some respect for you, Patricia. But I
Yes.
was ready to fight her for a
Yes.
while there.
No. Agreed. Agreed. She was a vile character. I
She
hated
was.
her from the most, like the
Yes.
first minute that she showed up, especially the
Yes.
first time. I really, really hated her. This time I had more empathy for her because I kind of remembered that she got better later on.
Mhm.
But yeah, I hated her, like the pressuring about having a kid and sort of the
Yep.
snarky remarks and sort of the very much treating Roya as like a foreigner, like, you immigrant marrying my brother and
Yeah.
taking the space away, all that. So it was definitely like I could imagine her as a person in real life that I do not
Yes.
like. But she had depth to her, much like
She
many of
did.
the characters in this book. And so yeah, she comes like after Marigold dies, she comes to Roy's house with the items for Nowruz, which
Mhm.
if you could explain this better, but it's like a bunch of items that start with the same letter, right?
Yeah. So it's called a haft scene. I literally have
Yes.
mine set up right here.
Ah, yay.
So it's called a haft scene, which haft means seven.
hmm
So like there's seven items that all start with the letter S that are on
Yes.
the table that you set up. So
hmm
the holiday is like it's like a new year. Nowruz means new day. So it's just
hmm
like New Year holiday. It's like
hmm
it's like a Zoroastrian, I think, originally like tradition.
Okay.
So it's like a secular holiday, but like it can also be religious for people who are religious.
Oh,
But it's
nice.
a pretty secular holiday, and so it's basically just to celebrate the new year. And so you set up the table with
Mhm.
like these seven things. Each of them like means something different to like celebrate the new year and bring in like new life and stuff like that. So yeah, she come. I don't remember which one she comes with, but like the things on the table are like seed, which is an apple, sumbul,
Mhm.
which is a hyacinth,
Mm.
senjed, which are I don't even know what they are. They're kind of like Chinese red dates, but they're not like
Oh, okay.
I don't know
Interesting.
what they are in English.
Okay.
And what are the other things? Somar, which is like a spice, like
Mhm.
what's it in English? Sumac? Is that what you call it? I don't know.
I don't know.
It's like a spice that put in a lot of
Yeah.
Persian food, and I'm sure a lot of other like Asian foods.
Yeah.
What else? Serke, which is I'm forgetting the English words. Vinegar.
This is my issue
um,
too, all the time. I'm like, what is this in English? Yeah.
yeah, every time I say it in like Farsi, I get confused. And what else? I'm forgetting. Anyway, there are seven things
Oh,
that all start with the letter S.
yeah.
She comes over
Yeah.
with like some of them for Nowruz
Yeah. Yeah. I think she just like
for
goes to like
Roya.
the supermarket and finds whatever she can.
Yeah,
But like the gesture of it was just so sweet.
it
And like
was.
she was trying to show that she accepted Roya and loved her
Yeah,
as she is,
yeah,
which I appreciate. Like I love that it was so something so specifically Persian, like also
yeah,
showing that she's accepting her as, you know, being not white and not
Yeah.
something Patricia was used to. So that was lovely. Um, Agreed. Yeah, thank you for bringing up Patricia because she was a good one. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else that I wanted to discuss. I feel like we covered a lot of it, but I'm just gonna go through what everyone else put here. Oh my God, I've like missed so many. The ending needed a longer Roy Obama reunion. Oh my God, yeah, agreed. Also, did anyone feel like that whole reunion at the end, and also like the aspect of the letters, feels so much like The Notebook? Am I the only one who thought
A
that?
little.
Like the
No,
entire,
I was
the
getting
like
the
the
same
plot line.
vibe
Yeah,
because we're
yeah.
in that, like, it's a nursing home, isn't it?
It's like
Like,
the nursing home.
yeah,
Yeah,
because we're in like the
the victims.
nursing home. I was like, if she doesn't like crawl into bed right now and we
Yeah,
both like peacefully
exactly.
die next to each other, then what's the point?
No, literally, that's where I thought it was going. I thought she was
Me
gonna crawl
too.
into bed and they were gonna peacefully die together. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. I liked that we got extra after it and that she didn't die, but
Yeah.
still, that's literally where my brain went. Absolutely. Yeah. So if you wanted a cooler version of The Notebook, read The
I
Stationery
agree.
Shop. That's gonna be my new recommendation. Let's see. I really like the parties that Jahangir threw for everyone. He would learn some Western dances and music with Bahman and teach to the rest of their friends. Yeah, those are actually a lot of fun. And I loved sort of the different cultural influences that were sort of going on during that time because of the various influences. Um, and that was really, really interesting as well. I feel like we didn't actually end up talking about the politics that much in this one because I feel like it's more of like a background element to
Yeah.
their love story rather than like deeply affecting it. Although what I did find interesting was sort of Bahman's personal feelings about politics and how he becomes disillusioned with his sort of like spirit of politics. Because at the beginning, he's like the boy who will change the world,
Hmm.
and is really involved with everything. But as soon as the coup happens and all this stuff with his mother happens, and he marries Shala, and he sort of just falls into this pattern and can't really see himself doing anything different. But then later on, we get in his letters that he sort of feels sad and disillusioned about the fact that like they're going through the same problems in 1970 that they
Yeah.
did in 1950, which I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Did you like get any context about that from your parents when you
Well,
were,
I
or
mean,
from your mom when you
everything
were talking to
that
her about it?
the things that
Yeah.
I learned about most growing up, like from my family, were about the 1970 revolution,
Hmm.
because that's what my parents lived through. So
Hmm.
like from them, I have very much the perspective that like Bachman and Roya have of like being almost like, well, Roya is a teenager at that point, I think.
Hmm.
But like they have like that teenage-ish, very young perspective
Yeah.
on the like war, or the, not a war at that time, but the coup at that time.
Hmm.
Like my parents were teenagers during the like 1970s
Hmm.
revolution. So like
Yeah.
the perspective, it was like interesting because like the way that they felt, like my mom was also very much like very similar to Bachman, like very like politically like radicalized, very like
Mm.
involved in politics and stuff like that.
Nice. Yeah.
And so like seeing like the way that he like became so disillusioned with it after some time and like how it had changed him felt very like reflective of like my own family just in the second
Yeah.
time that it happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Sort
found
of
it like
like history
really
repeating itself.
realistic and really like I felt I understood him a lot, I think, because
Yeah.
I had that like
Yeah.
personal experience with someone who's experienced that same feeling.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like I've also heard like my grandparents and stuff talk about like experiencing like both of those like not too far
Hmm.
apart, and seeing like
Yeah.
the same thing essentially happening over and over again and
Hmm.
not being able to do anything about it. So yeah, I really liked the political aspects of this book. And I agree that it definitely does take more of like a background to the
Hmm.
actual like romance and like their relationship and their like interpersonal like feelings
Hmm.
and stuff like that. But at the same time, I feel like you can clearly see like how much it
Yeah.
had influenced them throughout the entire
Yeah.
story and like who they became and what choices they made and everything.
Hmm.
Because it was
Yeah.
it was very much like a big part of their lives, obviously.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah.
it felt so like realistic, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I feel like that's like sort of how it happens in real life. Like the political
Yeah.
things, like we don't think about it. Sometimes we don't think about it too often, but like those things end up affecting our lives in very dramatic ways, just like
Yeah.
in slow sort of beat downs. And part of the reason why Roya leaves is because of everything that's going on in Iran,
Yeah.
and her being in that square when Mr. Fakhri gets shot. Um, And I agree. It was like so interesting. And I loved getting Bahman's perspective and sort of seeing how the everyday things and sort of interpersonal stuff can sort of take away from, the political leanings that he
Yeah.
had. Because it's harder to think about like things larger than yourself and, people beyond your immediate vicinity when you are dealing with the people in your immediate vicinity,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that was like very endearing about his character. And I felt for him so much when he talks about like having to leave Iran with his children when they were like in their 20s and he was worried about one of them getting drafted and all of that. Like that was really realistic and
Yeah.
like just interesting and heartbreaking also.
Yeah.
But
For me,
yeah.
it was just like very like much just like a different version of the same story that I had heard from like my family. So like
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the reason I just liked this so much. Like it just felt like
Mm-hmm.
it could have been a different family member just telling me their version of what happened because like I'd heard
Yeah.
these stories from my parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and stuff. So like it was all very much just like an extension of that to me. So it felt so relatable, even though I'm
Mm-hmm.
very much removed from that still.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's 100%. And that kind of reminds me of one of the discussions that we had for a previous book club pick, which was Next Year in Havana, which also deals with sort of a similar situation, like a historical romance set at the backdrop of a revolution. And there's a character in that book who, comes from sort of the diaspora and who hasn't experienced all of these things, but has heard all the stories.
Mhm.
And so there's like a perception that they have, having heard all the stories, but going back, it's very different also. Um, and yeah, I love sort of the parallels that we're just sort of seeing across like these different cultures, but also like very similar situations that,
Yeah.
so many places around the world have experienced because
Yeah.
of various global things. Okay, we've been talking
Imperialism.
for a while. Yes,
We love
I don't want to
it.
say it, but yeah, it's there.
Mhm.
It's the large white specter over the world. With that said, and that cheery note, thank you everyone so much for joining us. I always love these live shows because I feel like we just really get in depth with it, and also just being joined by another person of color on, the live show is just really exciting because we get to talk about, really in-depth things that are also very relatable to me personally and to a lot of you watching, and also just expands the horizons of some of you watching. So love it. We have a little thank you from someone here. Thank you for choosing this book. I probably never would have read it if not for the group. Absolutely love the book. This is what I love to hear. Y'all are feeding my ego and I love it. But yeah, thank you guys so much. I just wanted to tell you, if you forgot, the next book club pick is Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri, another fantasy pick. And then after that for May is Blue Skin Gods by S.J. Sindhu. I'm very excited for both of these. Empire of Sand is a fantasy. Blue Skin Gods is like sort of a contemporary, but has, I think, a little bit of a magical aspect to it. And I will be announcing the June to September picks on Monday. I filmed the video. I need to edit it. And then that will be up on Monday. So look forward to that because I'm announcing the co-hosts as well, which you will recognize many of them. And I'm very excited to chat with them. So yeah, just excited overall. Any last words from you, Hannah, before we close off?
Well, thank you for like inviting me to be a part of this,
Yeah.
and I'm very appreciative. I love what you're doing with the book club. I think it's
Yeah.
amazing. And everyone, if you're not, I mean, I'm sure everyone here is subscribed, but if you're not subscribed, you should be subscribed to Jenny's channel because she's amazing and she makes incredible content. And
Yes.
the sweetest person. So yes.
Amazing. Yes. And obviously, if you haven't, if you're new to Hannah's channel, which I would find very, very surprising if you are, definitely go check her out. She's linked down below and has some of the best reviews of books. Just chef's kiss. But yes, thank you guys so much for joining us. We will see you next time. And yeah, see you later. Bye bye.